Good morning, and welcome to your daily Farm and Home Show, brought to you by the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service. And now, here's your host. Good morning, and welcome to your Farm and Home Show. My name is Joanna, and this morning we're visiting with Forrest Wynne. He's with the Kentucky State University Extension Service and is our aquaculture specialist for the state. So anything to do with ponds and fish, Forrest is who we call. Thanks for being here with us today, Forrest.
Thanks, Joanna.
Now today we're going to talk a little bit about siting a pond. We get a lot of calls about, I want a pond, but there are a lot of things to consider before we actually construct.
There are, and the recommendation is to really get as much help as you can. Private excavators, NRCS personnel, ourselves, even the fish and game biologists, in trying to pick a good site for your pond. This area, many areas in Kentucky, have karst formations underlying the subsoils, and obviously this can resort to leaking ponds and other problems. We all remember the Corvette Museum incident, yes. Those types of things. So it's important to try to get a good location in the siting initially. Leaking ponds are the hardest things to correct of all the pond management issues we address. So there's no 100% guarantee on farm ponds, but we can hopefully get the odds in your favor, or get a recommendation not to build on a certain site, which can save a person a lot of money.
Absolutely.
At thousands of dollars an acre to construct a pond, the last thing you want is a hole that doesn't hold water.
And that's probably the #1 concern we get from pond owners is I have a leaky pond, or, this particular spot held water many, many years ago, so that's the spot we think that's where we should put it, and then come to find out that it was on a karst location is not gonna hold water.
And that can change over time, obviously. That geology is unstable under there, but, again, we can try to hedge our bets and make good guesses as to what might succeed and what might not. You can look in your area and see if there's neighbors have successful ponds that are holding this kind of things. You can try to increase your odds for success. Also, the pond, once a site's picked, has to be constructed properly. Probably 30% clay is ideal or more. You don't want sand and gravel seams. You might not have too much of that here, but we do in other parts of the state. Rock outcroppings of any kind that are exposed during the digging of the basin or the dam. These kinds of things can all lead to trouble. So we want 6-inch compacted clay blankets to form the levee or the dam and the basin. And this provides our impermeable clay liner in the basin of the pond, holds water. So this is really what we want. Now, some ponds might leak slightly after construction, and many ponds do leak slightly throughout their lives. But we've all seen ponds that, really leak excessively, and they look bad and don't hold much water.
Yeah.
So.
And, some years are much, much drier than others, so we would assume that we might have some lower levels there, but usually it's considerable when people are starting to call us after the fact.
Yeah, it looks bad. It's aesthetically not pleasing. You only need about 6 feet of water to grow fish in, really, at the most. So you don't need a ton of water to grow fish.
I was going to ask you about size, because a lot of people say, well, I'm not exactly for sure how big I want my pond.
Well, most of our ponds are watershed ponds, so the contour of the land is going to dictate pretty much how much surface acre you can get out of it, plus dam height.
And so your best advice is to do a lot of planning beforehand.
Yeah, and we have literature on doing this. Again, don't be shy about going to NRCS or ourselves, Fish Game Department, private excavators. A good private excavator is not going to want to dig a pond for you that's not going to hold water, so go with recommended sources of excavators.
Yeah, because a lot of times people will call and say, well, I know a guy who has that, but there's some expertise that goes into that.
Right.
And so probably to get somebody who is reputable and well-known.
And experienced in building ponds. Some folks, build foundations for houses, they do other landforming, but they're not necessarily experienced pond builders. So people that have the right equipment. Sheep's foot roller for compaction is important. Get proper compaction, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned literature. How would they get a hold? Is it online, or would
we have it online? I can email it to you or any of the agents, or you can just have it in your files. We have some nationally produced publications that are quite good, quite rigorously peer-reviewed.
All right, so if anybody has any questions about siting a pond, how to build a pond, and pond management, which we'll discuss a little bit later this week, contact your local extension office. We'd be happy to get you the information. And if we don't know, we certainly, Forrest is just a phone call away, and we can certainly call him. So we appreciate you being here today and sharing that information with us. And we appreciate you watching the Farm and Home Show, and hope you have a great day. Welcome to your Farm and Home Show. My name is Joanna, and this morning we're visiting with Forrest Wynne. He's the Kentucky State University Extension Service as the aquaculture specialist. Good morning, Forrest.
Good morning.
Well, I'm so glad he's here today because I'm ready for some fishing weather. And a lot of people this time of year start thinking about, you know, maybe I should stock my pond or maybe have questions about that. And Forrest has all the secrets. So you're here to tell us today about what we need to think about.
Well, I don't know about the secrets. We do have literature that explain this, so it can be a lot to try to keep focused on at one time. But primarily our small ponds, we have for farm ponds, recreational ponds, that sort of thing. We stock with bass, bluegill, and channel catfish. Those are the three species we really focus on. The bluegill provide forage for the bass. The bass control the numbers of bluegill. And the idea would be that you would get 6-inch bluegill suitable for harvesting, fishing, consumption, that sort of thing, and largemouth bass over a pound. And the catfish you can stock in supplementally if you want to. You don't have to stock channel catfish if you don't want to. But the bass and the bluegill is a predator-prey dynamic that will work in a new or reclaimed pond, a pond that has no fish in it to start with.
And most of your fish and wildlife specialists will say that that's probably the best way to do it instead of adding fish to an existing fish pond.
Well, it really is. It can be ponds that already have a fish population in it really need to be sampled to see what's in there and what, if anything, can do to improve it. And even that's kind of a gamble that it doesn't always pay off. You might be able to add some large bluegill or bass depending on what the situation is. But the larger the fish, the more expensive they are. So normally we would stock probably about 200 bluegill to the acre in the fall, about 2 to 3 inches in length. Probably 50 or 60 bass in the spring, 2 to 3 inches in length. And also, and this is per acre, and also channel catfish we could stock in the fall at about 50 per acre if we wanted to stock channel catfish. Okay,
and you mentioned a little bit earlier in the week about only needing about 6 foot of water?
You really don't need that much water to grow fish in. Most of our ponds are deeper because our land is steep, it's hilly. I would tell people around here 8 feet of water is fine for fish production because we could even allow a couple feet of water loss for drought and still have plenty of water to grow fish in. Fish will grow fine in 4 feet of water, but that gets a little iffy, especially during the dry season. It's hard to imagine a dry season right now, but
that is true. That is true. Now, what about people ask, like, where do I get my fish?
Well, the Fish and Game Department has discontinued their pond stocking program, the State Fish and Game Department. So now you're pretty much dependent on these fish trucks that come around to various ag supply stores. Farm seed stores, these sorts of things. And you can check with them. Generally, they haul fish in the spring and the fall because the water temperatures are cooler and the fish will haul better then at those times and during the real hot summer months.
Okay, so you probably wouldn't recommend catching them out of a neighbor's pond or other source of water and throwing them in your pond.
You've got to be careful. Not all folks are real good about identifying specific species of fish, and there is always a risk of disease transmission from one pond to the other, so that's generally not preferred. It's done a lot, but it's not preferred. And
you mentioned if you already have fish stocked in your pond that you probably need to get an analysis of what's there. Who would they call to do something?
Well, we can do some of that. Really, the best way to do it is just fishing on your own to determine if the fishing is good. And that's kind of subjective. That's up to the individual landowner. But there are ways, when we have literature on how to determine whether what species you want. You really only want those 3 species of fish that I mentioned: bluegill, largemouth bass, and channel catfish.
Okay, stick to those 3.
And red ear sunfish. You can put those in too, but that's it. No more.
But that will provide great recreation usually for, I know I have some grandparents who call and say, I just want my kids to have or grandkids to have a spot to fish, and that will do that.
These species work out well together. Many of the other species, crappie, et cetera, just overpopulate in a pond, and it's really hard to get fish out of a pond when you once you have them in there. So it's kind of an all or nothing proposition, unfortunately. Oftentimes you have to take all the fish out of a pond to, by chemical means.
So the best way is to start fresh, start with the right species, and then you'll have many years.
Be a
of
control
fishing.
freak about your pond.
There you go. Well, I certainly appreciate the information. And we have publications available at the Extension office if you would like more information about pond stocking. Thanks for watching and have a great day. And welcome to your Farm and Home Show. My name is Joanna Coles, and this morning we're visiting with Forrest Wynne. He is with the Cooperative Extension Service as our aquaculture specialist. Good morning, Forrest.
Good morning.
Well, today we're going to talk a little bit. We've talked about siting our pond and stocking our pond, but then once we get all that done, we have to maintain a good water quality in there.
Right.
And so give us some tips on how to do that.
The most important thing you can do, much the way you would put agricultural limestone on a field, if your pond is built in acidic soils, and I don't know how much of a problem that is here because you've probably got a lot of karst here, but anyway, a lot of limestone formations. But neutralizing the pH, getting it up around neutral, we recommend an alfalfa liming rate, to be honest, for ponds. So it's a pretty heavy liming rate. And if your alkalinities, your total alkalinities are low in your ponds, if your soils are acidic, this will help release nutrients, phosphorus mostly. Phosphorus is a limiting nutrient in fresh water. And this will release phosphorus into the food chain. It'll stimulate the zooplankton populations and help your fish grow. It'll provide food for them. So a water test, a soil test,
Those would be help to determine what your pH is?
Yeah, soil pH. It's much the way you would go about it in a field. You just oftentimes have the inconvenience of having it covered with water. But if you can do this during the construction process, you would treat it much like you would an alfalfa field for.
And so would you apply the lime before water fill?
Ideally, it's a lot easier to apply in a dry basin of a pond and disc it in than it is to. That having been said, we throw a lot of lime into filled ponds and just hope for the best. The idea is to distribute it uniformly over the surface of the pond, but that's easier to talk about than it is to do.
Yeah, but it's important. It's important for the growth of our fish and those type of things, and to keep our water quality.
Yeah. Much the way you would lime an acidic field for your crop, it's the same thought.
But probably need to have it tested to know exactly how much, because can we overdo a good thing?
You know, you really can't add too much agricultural limestone to a pond. Once it gets up to a certain pH, it will no longer dissolve. And that requires a whole lot of lime to do that. So, I mean, usually we add it in tons to the acre, pretty much the same as you would a field.
Now, in talking about water quality, we have some people who ask, do I need to feed my fish or do I need to fertilize around that area? And sometimes that can cause more problems.
Phosphorus, again, is the limiting nutrient, and excess phosphorus in the system will stimulate unwanted plant growth, including filamentous algae and some of these other things. The average pond owner, I do not recommend they fertilize their ponds. If the pond is well limed, that's fine. If you want to throw out a few pounds of feed every day to your fish, that's not going to hurt anything. But, manures, row crop runoff, septic, any of these things that might contain sources of phosphorus the plants will greatly appreciate in the pond. And the other thing is keeping your banks fairly well sloped. A 3-to-1 inside slope when you're constructing a pond will help avoid shallow areas and unwanted plant growth as well.
Absolutely, and a lot of our ponds are in the middle of a farm. They're a farm pond. Is it a good idea to maybe have a grassy buffer around
a buffer strip around that, certainly. Depending on the how steep the land is, anywhere 50, 100 feet. I mean, it's a lot taken away a lot of times from a small farm, but if you want to keep good water quality in the pond, it's worth considering. And again, ponds are expensive to construct, so you want to do the best you can to stabilize the soils going in and balance the nutrient load going in as well.
Now, what about aeration? Is that important or an important thing to think about?
It's an insurance policy for your pond. Unfortunately, it's expensive in terms of the units. They probably go for $800 to $1,000 a piece. There's diffused air systems for deep ponds that are probably 10 feet deep or greater. And there's surface aeration that is for shallower ponds, 10 feet or less. Don't confuse these with fountains. Fountains look pretty, but they squirt small amounts of water up in the air under high pressure. They look pretty, but they don't move much water. But a big factor is just the cost of electrical installation to the pond.
Absolutely.
So it may be cost prohibitive in some cases. As you mentioned, the pond in the middle of a field somewhere. Ponds near your home, a business, something like that, much more doable.
Yeah, but aeration certainly something to think about, especially if you're just in the construction phase where that might be a little bit easier to go ahead and
if you can construct a pond where you can get electricity to it, that might be, it's really the best insurance policy for your fish.
All right, well, certainly great information about keeping our water quality and our ponds at the best management level that we can. But if you still have questions, you can certainly contact your local extension office and we'd be happy to help. Thanks for watching and have a great day. If you have questions about today's topic, please call the Warren County Extension Office at the number on your screen. Thanks for watching and have a great day.